I put this forward because I thought that it was the right thing to do for low-income people, small businesses, and families.
This could possibly be the first decision before this council that cannot be taken back.
Well, that is just part of the clash between Council President Sarah Nelson and Councilmember Dan Strauss, very palpable this week, as Nelson's legislation to build workforce housing in the SODO neighborhood, cheered by affordable housing supporters, hated by the Port of Seattle, it's passed with a 6-3 decision. So what did we learn from this challenging choice about the council's priorities, the political standing of the port, and the resolve of the council president? Also this week, a bombshell hitting the mayor's office from a former staff member who happens to be the mayor's niece, and then another bombshell hitting Seattle Public Schools rather unexpectedly. So take cover, everybody. We're talking about this and a whole lot more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I'm joined by my co-host, David Croman. David, I'm going to need full disclosure from you on this one. Did you or did you not set an alarm for 3 a.m. on Tuesday morning to watch the start of the Major League Baseball season in Tokyo? What can you tell me?
I did not, though my 6-month-old got me up around that time anyway. So I could have turned it on, but I wasn't smart enough to think about flipping it on.
This is why we love our children, though. David, Thank you very much for sharing that. Thanks for being with me. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast up on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks always to our show patrons. And heads up, some special patrons first content coming your way this week. You're going to get it before anybody else, you lucky devils. And remember, if you are a patron, we also work to answer your questions on the show. So please do join in. Find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and pledge your support starting as low as $5 a month. Finally, a big thanks to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's do this. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Well, it took a 5+ hour meeting and plenty of amendments, but Council President Sarah Nelson's workforce housing measure to put close to 1,000 housing units in the Stadium District and SODO has passed. The final tally was 6-3. The yeses, Nelson, Moore, Rivera, Solomon, Saka, and Hollingsworth, who changed to a yes vote after a no vote in committee a few weeks ago. The noes were Strauss, who voted absolutely not on the final tally, Kettle and Rink. David, we can get into some of the details in a second, but I wanted to frame the overall story in this way, and I saw you go down this path as you were writing about this in the Seattle Times. What was gained with this vote and what was lost or sacrificed? Because, yes, this definitely looks like a win for affordable housing, this new Makers District. A lot of people are excited about that. That's important. But I also wonder about how this impacts the city's relationship with the Port of Seattle. I wonder about Council President Nelson's relationship with Councilmember Strauss or Kettle going forward. Can you go down that path with me, what you see as the gains and losses on this vote?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple levels to that, depending on whom you ask. Of course, the Port of Seattle, as they have said over and over and over, say the loss is, further encroachment into industrial lands with housing. I mean, basically, the main argument they're making is this is a step toward gentrification. They have a lot of concerns about traffic and safety and all that, but at the end of the day, they were okay with hotels there and they are not okay with housing. And I think the kind of main reason for that is they see that people living there, they are scared, are going to represent a constituency that City Hall will have to respond to in the future. And that constituency, they fear, could be sort of anti-industry. So, that's the kind of big loss if you ask the Port of Seattle. But on a more political level, I think Council President Nelson and Councilmember Strauss's relationship was already deteriorating over the last year. And this, in frankly, fairly awkward ways, if you're watching, really push that over the brink. Watching the two of them interact is deeply uncomfortable, if we're being honest. I think, though, there is a sort of broader question. She is the face of this kind of supposedly unified moderate council that came into office and now has two members in Strauss and Kettle sort of questioning her decision-making in this process. Kettle is a little softer around the edges when he talks about it, but nonetheless,
you can tell,
has been pretty forward in his opinions that he thinks this was a bad process and done in a sort of underhanded way. And so, Council President Nelson made the point to me that she thinks most elected officials are capable and good at sort of considering issues one at a time. The implication being, sure, this was a knockdown, drag out fight, but I don't anticipate that this is going to hurt in the future. I don't think the Port of Seattle would say that.
Right.
They are deeply hurt and feel pretty disrespected around this. So it's hard to say exactly how much sort of tangible change or barriers this puts up in the future. But if the city council's goal was to sort of be the vision of one Seattle, or not be the openly warring council, then that seems to be fading a bit.
And I look also at that relationship with the port. What does that mean that after these port commissioners, one after the other, were saying this is a bad idea, this is leading towards gentrification, you take industrial lands, you can't get them back? What does that mean, that relationship being frayed, especially between the city and the port?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, except for that, it is a common, the port and the city have to work together a lot. I'm thinking of, for example, the Seattle Department of Transportation is going to build a bike lane along Elliott Way, kind of connecting the waterfront to the sculpture park. And, there was a whole debate over how that bike lane should interact with the cruise terminal there.
Okay,
And that's a sort of thing that needed to be worked out between the Port of Seattle and the City of Seattle. They were able to do it in sort of a civil way, and they seem to have come to a decent conclusion there. But you can imagine a scenario where if the council, or if the Port of Seattle doesn't essentially trust the City of Seattle, that issues like that could become maybe a little harder to resolve. I particularly when it comes to transportation and freight movement, there are just a lot of issues where the City of Seattle and the Port of Seattle have to work together. And it hasn't always been a good relationship. Councilmember Strauss would tell you that it had improved in recent years and now is being set back. I think still at the end of the day, everybody involved has sort of specific things they're going to want to accomplish. And if that means working together, I suspect they will do it. But perhaps that level of trust that some might hope would be there has vanished a little bit.
Any other takeaways from this, David? I'm just trying to look towards the future in this situation, this Makers District actually being built, and you're going to have construction workers driving by, longshoremen and whatever else. Is it going to be one of these kind of simmering things that sticks around for a while in terms of the discord that happened before this decision, or how do you look at this? Because I guess in the end, we're talking about close to 1,000 affordable housing units here, which I think some people would say is a great thing. But again, there's this animosity behind it. So I just some final thoughts on this, looking forward about how this is going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a timing question because, one of the votes that they took last night was to extend the implementation date of this rezone until the end of June.
Right, June 30th.
So that means at the very earliest, an agreement could be signed and construction could begin sometime in July. But, while I think there is an assumption that housing there would be built eventually, I don't know how quickly that would happen. And then, of course, we look to the fall and who's up for re-election, but Council President Nelson. Not to mention, Council Member Solomon's seat too, and he was a yes vote for this. And so, you can imagine a scenario where you have two, Council Member Nelson loses, you get a new person in, and the port says, you guys went back on your word in 2023, so we don't have any problem with coming right back to the city hall and lobbying to overturn this decision. I'm sure, judging by Council Member Strauss's extensive comments last night, I don't think he would have any problem with bringing this right back up again in early 2026. I have a hard time imagining him endorsing Council President Nelson's reelection. You could see the port, pushing for somebody else. So, and then there's another question too about legal challenges. I know there was a threat at one point. I don't know exactly how it would be challenged or what the legal theory would be there, but I'm sure there will be some. That could delay too. I mean, I think the port will do anything to delay this from actually beginning until next year, probably on the hopes that there's a different looking council who might be interested in kind of going back on this.
Wow, so interesting to see all the possibilities here. David, thanks for breaking this down. I know we're going to have more to talk about this in the weeks and months ahead. But I did want to talk about another big story hitting the mayor's office this week, as his niece and former deputy mayor, Manisha Harrell, has spoken out about her uncle and former boss. Manisha Harrell left her position in 2023 after about a year and a half on the job. She describes the work environment as toxic, where white male advisors were in power and she was constantly snubbed. She says other women connected to the mayor's office have had a similar experience. This was a story from KUOW. They confirmed that with 6 other women, most of whom were not named in this story. David, I just wanted to get your take on this. What do you make of this revelation from Manisha Harrell? What impact do you think it might have on the mayor's reelection bid this year?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I know Monisha has been a frequent. I think most people who work in this space were not surprised that Monisha had critical things to say about Mayor Harrell.
Okay.
She left that office on not the best of terms, clearly. I think that was sort of known at the time. And, I think my sense is a lot of, there was just some fairly kind of factional fights within that office where Monisha represented kind of one faction, whereas some other members of the cabinet represented another. And Monisha's side didn't really come out victorious in there. And so the relationship ended poorly. I think the fact that she went on the record with all this is certainly notable. As far as what it means for Mayor Harrell's reelection bid, I don't know, and I couldn't say. I think the environment that it was discussed in that story is certainly concerning and worth noting. Yeah. There wasn't any sort of one scandalous piece of that I think the general public might kind of glom onto and see as a reason to kind of bring down the mayor. And so, I can't make any predictions about what this means for his reelection bid, but certainly if the allegations are that are true that women in particular have a difficult time working in that office, that's concerning. There were some voices in that story too.
I was going to say,
including women of color who said that is not the case. Saying I've have felt empowered in this office. So there's a counter argument there. Yeah. KUOW seemed to be making the point that those statements were coordinated by the mayor's office. Yeah. I think there was a line saying that they had 6 people reach out to them unsolicited. The implication being those people were encouraged to do so. So there's some sort of wonky in the weeds behind the scenes reporting stuff here that I think is maybe a little difficult to get into without breaking any sort of agreements that people have with one another. But certainly it's it's never a good look when your own niece goes public with concerns about how you run your office.
No. And I wonder how it looks. Is it a situation where this really does stick to the mayor and cause him trouble, or does it backfire and just come across as a smear campaign? I wonder about that and what motivated this. Does that trouble you at all? Do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't want to. I have not. This isn't my story.
It's not mine either. Yeah,
I didn't report it out, so I don't want to speculate too much on people's motives here or what it means. Again, this is we've had a few mayors in a row with very tangible kind of scandals attached to them. Of course, Ed Murray, but Jenny Durkin and her texts. These are fairly specific things.
She dropped her phone in the lake, David. She dropped her phone in the lake. Just telling you. Okay.
These are like concrete things that we hold on to. I tend to think that sort of general feelings about environment or whether something is toxic or not toxic, it maybe again is a little hard for readers to keep in their mind. And so again, if I'm making predictions, I don't think this has the staying power of, say, a mayor deleting texts from a very important time in the city's history. But again, this is an election year. I think there's going to probably be more things that come out as people, because this is when the gloves come off. People are running for this office. I imagine that there's going to be more little chinks in the armor of Mayor Harrell, who I think a lot of people had seen as sort of inevitable to be reelected.
Right.
But enough of these stories and that inevitability starts to starts to crumble a little bit.
Yeah, we will see what happens in the months ahead. This is a very interesting election cycle already. And shoot, we're only in March here. All right, well, up next, an update on Sound Transit and how the city of Seattle can maybe, I'm laying a big air quote on maybe there, speed up the process of bringing light rail to West Seattle and Ballard. We'll take a look at what the city is considering coming up on Now Hear This. The Seattle City Council's Transportation Committee met on Tuesday morning to discuss ways to speed up construction for light rail with the planned extensions for West Seattle and Ballard. Time is money for Sound Transit, as explained by the agency's Executive Director of Capital Delivery, Brad Owen, when he was asked by Council Transportation Committee Chair Rob Saka about the current projected cost of the West Seattle extension versus the original cost projection.
Our current estimate that we have is roughly 6.8 to 7.2, I believe, is what we've reported to our board. In the financial plan,
billion?
Yes, billion. Apologize. 6.8 to 7.4 billion, and in the financial plan that we have, the allocated funding is 4.1.
Yeah, $7+ billion versus 4.1, which voters approved. There's a big difference there, and there's some concerns about this. But David, I just wanted to get to this because I like the idea of speeding up the construction of these mega projects by streamlining the permitting process. I live in West Seattle. Sounds really great to me. And we're talking about construction supposed to begin for West Seattle's extension in 2027, which is not that far away. But I was just trying to get to it. How much will a sped up permit process really affect the timeline for Sound Transit and the budget here, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I do know that it's the line about I will work to speed up Sound Transit projects was a near universal one on the campaign trail. It's sort of in the realm of I'm going to build 1,000 homes. Something that is said every campaign trail and almost never followed through on.
Sure.
You know what the city can do. I'm sure there are permitting reviews that they could streamline, but
sure.
We're talking about decade-long projects here. I think Sound Transit's recent history has suggested that their timelines are going to slip, and their budgets are going to slip anyway. And so I think it'll be difficult to prove whether the city of Seattle can truncate time, because I think the chances of there being additional delays for other reasons Sound Transit are highly likely. So who's to say that if they have a year delay, it wouldn't have been 2 years delay.
Okay.
Seattle hadn't stepped in. I don't know. I think, I guess at a project at this level, I'm a little skeptical that it's the permitting that is really the big holdup here. I think it's really just that big construction projects generally have been really difficult since probably 2021. You see this at the state level. Everything's more expensive and taking longer. A lot of reasons for that. But whether to the extent that City of Seattle permitting is a barrier, I don't doubt that they could clear some of that away. But I guess I'm color me skeptical that that's going to really get us to light rail.
I guess I hear that too, because I'm looking at that $3 billion gap between what was originally projected and what they're talking about now, and then the possibility of tariffs on steel, et cetera, maybe bumping that cost up even higher. I mean, we're talking about a lot of money here. I did want to touch on one last thing here, because I guess in the back of my mind, one concern I would have about speeding up this process comes from businesses who would get displaced during light rail construction. Heard from some of them this week who were testifying in front of the Seattle City Council. And I've heard from some of these businesses in the West Seattle area. They're concerned that the amount they're being reimbursed doesn't begin to cover the actual cost of relocation. I guess my question there is, if there is a push to speed things up, how do you think that affects businesses who are really looking for some fair compensation out of this?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if those two things are necessarily related, but I will say that I think these businesses have good faith concerns, because if I'm thinking of the same businesses, it's like the preschool there, a few other businesses, and there's not a lot of way around that. I mean,
it's going to have to go that
Sound
direction.
Transit puts a station there, they will be displaced. And I also don't doubt that the reimbursements being offered is actually going to be quite a bit less than what they would really need to move. I talked to them when I was a transportation reporter about this too. So I don't think they're being hyperbolic necessarily that this would be quite bad for their business. The larger question though is, when you're building a transit system like this in a city that is already as built out as Seattle,
Yeah.
how does this compare to the other options, which are, put it in neighborhoods, frankly, and then you're booting people from you're booting people from the homes that they live in.
Sure.
Or you don't do it at all, in which case you're not delivering on the promise. So, again, I'm highly sympathetic to these businesses. And also, it is kind of the reality of the situation that if you're doing a project of this scale in a city like Seattle, there are going to be some losers, frankly.
Yeah, no, that's a challenge in looking at it. I do appreciate what you're saying, though. I think a lot of those businesses have concerns about this, and they are hoping that in this sped up process, their voices are still heard. So I think that's definitely come front and center here. And I did want to add one quick land use note here. The committee overseeing the comprehensive plan for the city council is meeting this week to figure out how to put the state's missing middle housing requirements into place. We've touched on this earlier. These are requirements to add density. So this would be before the final comp plan is put together. They're going to be working on that this week. We've touched on this in the podcast, and we will keep you posted. But I did want to talk about another big headline this week. Seattle Public Schools Superintendent Brent Jones leaving his job in the fall of this year, as reported in the Seattle Times. This after a tumultuous 4 years on the job and just a month after he got a 1-year contract extension to stay on the job through June 2027. Jones says he is going to renegotiate the next teacher's contract, which is up in August, then have his last day September 3rd. His wife apparently got a vice chancellor job at a college in California. Jones himself reportedly does not have another job just yet. And David, I know we don't follow school issues that often, but here we are talking about, once again, a search for a superintendent, the fourth superintendent of Seattle Public Schools since 2014. Some thoughts on this and what has been happening with Brent Jones and a district that just can't seem to keep a superintendent.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, actually, honestly, the thing that surprised me more is that he was here for 4 years.
Stuck around that long. Yeah. Okay.
Because I can't remember the name of the woman before him, but
Denise.
She was there
Yeah.
much shorter than he was, if I recall.
Yeah.
It's a bad job right now. It's not a good job because the job right now is to figure out how to cut huge amounts of money from Seattle Public Schools. And I would imagine that most people working in this job got in because they want to help public schools grow. They put off, the superintendent put out that plan that would see I can't remember the exact number, but a number of schools closed.
Yeah, dozens of schools, right?
That was, kind of slammed with a lot of pushback, from understandably upset parents. They delayed that plan. I think the kind of hope was that maybe they could gin up some more money from the state to prevent some of these closures.
Sure.
That's clearly not going to happen, as Governor Ferguson has kind of ruled out new taxes and asked for cuts. And so I think Brent Jones is looking at his next year and seeing that he's going to have to bring back a plan to cut a huge amount of money. I think probably in his estimation, that's going to include closing schools. And frankly, who can blame him for not wanting to be the face of that?
Yeah, I suppose Denise Janot was the name that I was trying to think of earlier there. Yeah, I guess that's the thing I see too. We're still talking about a budget hole for Seattle Public Schools that's somewhere around $100 million. That stayed pretty constant over the past year, even after all the work that Jones has put in. I mean, does the school closure plan, I guess it has to come back at some point, but there was so much pushback against it from parents there. Where does this leave Seattle Public Schools for the school year ahead? I guess this is an unsettled time for them.
Yeah, you would think it probably comes back in some form, although, it's also worth noting that wasn't going to close the gap.
That was right. Not completely. Right.
And so they would have had to go deeper. So again, without more money from the state, there's not a lot of great options for public schools. And it sort of just leaves school closures and layoffs, which again, if you were somebody who spent your life in public schools and working your way to the position of superintendent, only to find that you need to start firing teachers, that's a tough job.
It sure is. And I'm really interested to see how he handles these contract negotiations later on this fall. All right. Well, up next, if it's too loud, you're too old. No, if it's too loud, you may be entitled to get some hearing protection at the next concert you go to. What in the name of rock and roll is going on here? We're going to take a closer look coming up on What's Next. All right, well, just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder in the city of Seattle, the city council this week is considering a measure requiring hearing protection to be made available in venues where loud music is playing. That hearing protection would have to provide noise reduction of at least 20 decibels. At least one option should be $1 or less if people have to buy it. The council's report on this says nearly 1 in 4 U.S. adults aged 20 to 69 show evidence of noise-induced hearing loss. And venues in this situation, as we're seeing it lay out in front of the council, would get 30 days to comply. Then it's a $50 citation for each week of non-compliance after that. David, I just wanted your take on this. Are we talking about the noise police here? What the heck is happening?
Yeah, this is from Councilmember Strauss, who I guess I'll note that yesterday before the SODO vote, one of his complaints about the process was that it was taking away from other bigger priorities in City Hall. And I guess one of those priorities is mandating earplugs be sold in music venues. Yeah. He called it a good little bill. You know, I guess I don't know exactly what to make of this. I guess I will say, though, that in some ways there are no such thing as little bills in City Hall. Everything that they pass has to, go through legal review.
I was going to say,
you have to come up with some kind of enforcement mechanism. So, okay, you're going to fine them $50 for not selling earplugs. Are you going to hire people to check that?
Yeah.
Is this an Office of Labor stand? There's just questions to every sort of new rule. And so it's just kind of an interesting situation where, are enough city council people going to be on the record opposing ear protection? I don't know.
Right.
At the same time, if I had to read their minds, I would imagine that most of them are probably not super enthusiastic to be spending time on requiring earplug sales. I don't know. I don't feel anything about this bill. In some ways, it is what it is. I would imagine if you're a music venue, it's a mild annoyance, but probably fairly easy to comply with. You just put out a little bucket and then say,
here's your earplugs if you want them.
Give them out for free, whatever. I mean, how much can they cost?
Yeah. Right. I guess, and you talk about no little bills. I mean, I guess that's the part of it I think about. Does it open these different venues to some sort of litigation or something like that if they don't provide hearing? That's the kind of path I would start to go down with this. And I wonder
if I go to a heavy metal concert at SODO and I don't wear earplugs, and then I'm diagnosed with tinnitus, and can I sue the venue because they didn't have earplugs for me?
Right.
Again, I mean, there are implications even to non-binding resolutions. That there is a process there and implications to them. And when you're talking about putting new laws in the books, there is always a process. I mean, and there are questions that flow from that. Even if the effect, which is, you have to sell. I mean, how much can earplugs cost? A nickel, and you have to sell them a $1. I mean, this is an easy thing on its surface, but there are, there are considerations.
Of course. I guess just wrapping up with you on this one, David, I think about the many concerts that I went to as a lad, and I was not in search of hearing protection. In fact, I was trying to get as close as I could to the stage and the huge speakers so I could get as blown away as possible. Loudest music concert you ever went to? What do you got?
Oh, that's easy, actually. Animal Collective when I was in college.
Awesome.
They're sort of a noise band, a lot of electronic sounds. Not only was it loud, but it was piercing. And I like that band a lot, but it was difficult to enjoy the concert. I've never been to a concert that loud.
Oh, wow. What was the venue?
It was the road. It was in Portland. I don't remember the name of that. It's one of Portland's less vaunted venues. It's not, the sound there is not great. I can't remember what it's called. It's just on the edge of the Chinatown in Portland. But it was not a great venue. It's sort of Portland's version of the old Crocodile.
There you go. Yeah,
kind of a cavernous, echoey room. It was kind of unpleasant.
It was so loud, David's mind was blown. He can't even remember where he was. I love it. Mine, I'm throwing it back old school. This was probably 90. Where was I? 96, I think. Irvine Meadows ACDC down in Southern California. Man alive. Couldn't hear for at least a day after that, and loved it. But yes, hearing loss is real, and we'll see what the city of Seattle does about it. Well, David, good to see you. Good to hear you as always. And thanks to everybody who is listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. If you're not a patron, please do support the show, wouldn't you? For just $5 a month on Patreon would be greatly appreciated, $5 or more. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.